Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is your guy C-Grimey, and we are back, the People's Podcast. And it's a beautiful day, a little overcast, but the sun is shining through. Got a great view of the mountains, man, downtown. One of my favorite spots. Y'all know where I'll be at. And as usual, I am here with the movers and shakers of the region, the Chattanooga and Hamilton County area. And you know it's big election time. May the 3rd, if you haven't already early voted, get ready to get down to your election place and vote. May the 3rd is coming up soon. So make plans to take off work if you gotta do what you gotta do. Get down and make sure that your voice is heard in these important times in our area. And as usual, I'm here with the best guests, movers and shakers of the city, people who want to use their voice, platforms, talents to make change for Chattanooga. And in our series with the candidates for the Hamilton County elections, I have mayor candidate Mr. Weston Wamp.
C-Grimey, man, thanks for having me.
Yes. So introduce yourself to the people, let them know who you are.
Yeah.
A little bit of your background and connection to Chattanooga and Hamilton County.
Born at Erlanger, so I literally...
Erlanger banger.
That's right. Now I got 4 babies of my own that were born at Erlanger. Grew up in Hickson. Mom's a Hickson girl. Grew up on Big Ridge. Went to Big Ridge Elementary. Moved across town as a teenager. Live in Lookout Valley. Lived on one side of Lookout Valley when I got married. On the other side of Lookout Valley now. Live over there in a lot of reasons, a lot of ways, just to be in proximity to downtown. It's where I've worked my whole career. Worked down at Warehouse Road now. Got started I went to UT. Got started in business. I don't know if you know those guys. I mean, for a while. Now, kind of the group of guys I got started with were first known as the Access America guys. I was technically an Access America employee for a couple months because I got involved before we had actually formalized Lamppost Group, before we built out the space that was in the Lebanon building for about a decade. That was awesome. I mean, I grew up in a family that was political because my dad had served in Congress and was into the building trades and architecture. My dad's brothers and his dad were architects, and so for a guy like me to have come up in kind of the world of design, politics, and some commercial real estate, to be just kind of to get a deep dive in business right off the bat with these guys who were at the time growing Access America Transport, wanted to invest in upstart companies and a new generation of entrepreneurs. It was awesome. I mean, I learned a lot fast, kind of got an old MBA in the School of Hard Knocks, just asking dumb questions until I was able to figure stuff out. I did primarily marketing communications for Lamppost and a lot of our companies over the kind of by 2016 had been trusted to move over to the investment side, was vetting deals, led the transition from Lamppost to Dynamo, which was at the time the largest startup fund that had ever been raised here in Chattanooga, $18 million fund. An awesome experience, focused on the logistics industry, which is both our legacy industry here, but also our high growth one. I mean, that industry, maybe if this were a 1 million person city, we couldn't say this, but given the size of this market, this economy, the logistics industry can and really ought to continue to fuel a lot of our growth. So it's cool to be a part of one of the unique growth stories in that industry. Started an organization, nonprofit a few years ago called the Millennial Debt Foundation, to advocate for long-term policy. I mean, government, particularly in Washington, it's worse in Washington in this way than it is at a local level. But we're lucky if those guys are talking about the next week, let alone the next year or the next decade or a generation ahead. And I think the country has just been really poor stewards. Both parties, I think, have been poor stewards for the last 20 years. And so we started this organization just to give a voice to young business leaders across the country. It's totally nonpartisan, 501c3. We've involved Republican and Democrat members of Congress. The Millennial Debt Commission that we started is a bipartisan group of business leaders. In fact, one of the guys who's on the commission, you may think this is cool, a guy from Atlanta, business guy, who got started in politics as John Lewis's campaign manager, was his district director, thoughtful guy, obviously, Who does? It's funny, we say these things here. I catch myself saying it right now. me and him, we don't agree on everything, but we've found some common ground on some issues. But that's really just life, I mean, the truth is, like, we can kind of categorize ourselves by party or skin color or whatever, but the truth is, like, when people, especially in this country, sit down and talk, we almost always end up agreeing more than we disagree. So I did that, and then spend a fair amount of my time serving on the Tennessee Board of Regents as an appointee of Governor Lee's. It's an unpaid volunteer position, but it's a privilege. The state has 3 or 4 large education boards. Board of Education, which oversees some K-12 stuff, the UT Board, which is obviously very high profile. There's a higher education board that would be low profile but important, and then the Board of Regents is all of our state's 2-year colleges. So I think of our system as the state's workforce development college system. All of our technical college, it's the largest college system in Tennessee. All of our technical colleges, 27 of them, and 13 community colleges. So I spent a lot of time at Chat State at the adjoining technical college. I'm a big believer in just alternative educational paths. I mean, that's the story of my life. I was the first college graduate in my mom's family. Got into the tech world. Tech companies don't care about where you went to college, really. They just care whether you can do the job. Can you sell? Can you code?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter as much as it used to. In fact, a lot of kids go off to college and get a degree that's worthless anyway. So I just am a believer that education's changing. It ought to change. Student loan debt ought to be avoided when it's not necessary. And Tennessee is very unique in that we run the country's only free 2-year college system. And so being able to serve on that board, it feels often like we're running, in an experimental zone. I mean, our system is just doing new things, bringing companies in. For example, like Ford's making that huge investment out in West Tennessee. Our college system actually was a part of the deal between the state of Tennessee and Ford, because we're building a new college for what's called Blue Oval City, the big Ford development out there. So that's a big passion in my life, and if you've heard almost anything about my campaign, it's really the reason I'm running, is just to oversee a renaissance in public education, and one that's focused on training our young people for careers as opposed to just kind of a one-size-fits-all model. Everybody needs to go to college.
So would you say that is one of the bases of your platform? And explain more about your platform and what you're running on and why you're running.
Yeah. I mean, the most honest, direct reason I'm running is that I've believed for a long time that the county mayor here, which is a kind of misunderstood position, because we've only had 3 of them. We haven't had an open seat race since 1994. I think it's the only position that, after the merger of the 2 school systems in the late 90s, the only one that could lead a real lasting set of changes and improvements in the public school system. The only elected official who could do that is a county mayor. School board members obviously get to play a day-to-day role. They're accountability partners for a school superintendent they hire. A school superintendent is called on to lead day-to-day. But I think we've overlooked the important role of a county mayor, which under Tennessee state law is the CEO of the county, is the fiscal agent. We only have one. There's only one taxing authority. Like, our school board, unlike a lot of school boards across the country, can't raise taxes on its own, can't determine what its allocated revenue is going to be. That decision is made by the county mayor. And then the county mayors we all have this expectation that the county mayor is going to play a role in school facilities, because they're often bond funded. That requires a participation and support of a county mayor. We expect that a county mayor is going to play a role in economic development, job recruitment. And man, what my campaign's all about really is just tying together for people my life and business experience, and I suppose my experience serving on the Board of Regents. And that is that education, workforce development, economic development, and really even crime are all totally interwoven. We can talk about them separately, but at the end of the day, like, the most profound role of county government here, and local government in general, depending on the city, some municipalities across the country run their own school systems, but in county government, the most important role is to educate children. It's 2/3 of the budget, 64% of the county budget, and so what an opportunity. And I think a lot of times in this community we've been cynical about public education, even though we ought to all pour into it. And so that's, at the end of the day, what my campaign's all about. Because I think, first of all, public education alone is 2/3 of the budget. Public education realistically affects almost everything else. Happy to talk about infrastructure issues. Happy to talk about affordable housing type issues. The county mayor does things and should speak into issues other than education. But this is the one that we haven't gotten right for a long time. And if we begin to make headway, all ships are going to rise.
What experience personally do you have with the public schools? Where did you go to school?
Yeah, I went to Big Ridge Elementary. So 6 years public school. My story is a lot like, I think, the story of a lot of people in the line. You and I are the exact same age. My story is a lot like a lot of people. So I get to the 5th, 6th grade transition. My mom, who's a Hickson High grad and a Hickson Junior High grad, at that time, Hickson Junior High, Hickson Middle School, was still in the old dilapidated facility that's now a community center. And she didn't want me going to that rundown school. And so, on a combined income, I don't know what they were making back then, but I mean, they on a family income of $150,000 a year or so, my parents found a way to, beginning of middle school, send my sister and I to Chattanooga Christian, and then went back to UT. So, kind of seen, both as a member of the Board of Regents, I've seen the public college system as a board member, seen the public college system as a student. Frankly, was pretty uninspired by my experience at UT. I mean, one of the reasons that I'm a contrarian in education, like I'm a UT football fan, but from an educational standpoint, I was not well served by our state's flagship university. I didn't get a good education there. Now, some of that's on me. I mean, I picked a track, like a lot of students do, that's not one that really specifically prepares you for the workforce. That's something I've talked about very openly as a member of the Board of Regents. And I mean, like the last thing, what we know, we've known this, but for more than ever, we've got evidence that so much of the future of your life is determined in the years leading up to elementary school and then your elementary school experience. And in that way, like, I'm a product of an excellent public school. I think it's one of the reasons that I'm as optimistic as I am about us fixing schools that don't have a great reputation or a great reality, and then telling the story of our many schools that function at a really high level. Because we actually have a bunch of good schools in this county. A lot of people don't realize that.
We got a bunch of good schools. We have some, I was going to use another describing word, but we have some that are broken down. We have some that have been divested in over the decades. You talked about the merger when the city and city schools went to the county, and we've seen a lot of the inner city schools kind of going ruined since that time.
Yeah.
How do we get schools like Tyner, Brainerd, other schools, if they're even gonna stay after those decisions are made, how do we get better schools in the inner city?
Well, Tyner's coming, right? I mean, Tyner's going to be the biggest, most beautiful school.
I've been saying that for 5 years.
Well, but I mean, the money's now been allocated. So, I mean, we're in a different... It's always slow. I mean, I've been waiting on our new technical college out of Chattanooga State to come out of the ground for the money was allocated 2.5 years ago. So, I mean, government, unfortunately, just moves slow. That's bureaucracy for you. But, I mean, one problem you got is you got a moving target on construction costs. It's, we're in a relatively historic moment. But you got $74 million between COVID money and bond funding that Coppinger did. They're building a new Tyner. That's just, it's the number one priority in the whole, within county government. I mean, I've not heard anybody hedge from the reality. I think the only fear is that it may end up costing $100 million, which is not ideal because we live in it's going to happen. I have no reason to believe that it's not going to happen. But moving forward, when we look at other schools, I'm actually real passionate that we begin to look at opportunities like what the school system did out at Cigna, where you acquire a facility that was a call center. Call center, as it turns out, is designed and serves a lot of the same functions as an elementary school. So they're going to acquire that Cigna facility to basically allow for an expansion of East Brainerd Elementary. That's an interesting way to repurpose modern facilities into good school facilities. So Tyner, I think, is heading in the right direction. Howard, facility-wise, is fine. Howard, from a education standpoint, has a unique set of challenges you're probably familiar with. Where'd you go to school?
Red Bank. But yeah, I'm from East Chad.
I mean, you realize what's going on. And Howard's now predominantly Latino.
Yep.
There's really kind of two, even within the Latino community at Howard, you've got first and second language learners. I mean, just during the pandemic, there was an influx of students who really didn't speak English. And so that's unfortunate in a way for Howard, because you end up having students who have to take the ACT, for example. But if you can't speak English, or if you barely speak English because it's your second language and you're just learning it, you're not going to score well in the ACT. So that further depresses Howard's test scores. I think Howard's changing. I don't think that's going to stop. I think Howard's legacy is probably going to change with the demographics of Alton Park and kind of further east. Brainerd, I'm most concerned about. I mean, Brainerd has kind of tremendous legacy. I actually was having lunch yesterday with one of Brainerd's former principals. I went and spent a few hours at Brainerd with Principal Sorrells. I mean, the coolest thing about Brainerd is you probably know. I mean, Crystal Sorrells is she's like the sort of dream ticket principal at Brainerd. And so for her to have come back to her alma mater and be willing to kind of she's one of the great former principal of the year at East Ridge. For her to come back is a reason for all of us to want to kind of watch closely what she's able to do. But she's got to have support. And I think we've set a lot of students in our predominantly minority high schools up for failure in this regard. I'm all about early childhood reading, but the conversation around public education in this community has basically been the same for 25 years, maybe longer, but at least 25 years. And that is early childhood reading, early childhood reading, early childhood reading. Well, what about the kids? Third grade's that's the big year, because that at third grade, that's where they say, your life's going to kind of go on one of a couple different trajectories based on whether you're reading in third grade. I think part of the reason that's true is because K-12 education in the modern era is a one-size-fits-all model. You're either successful because you get to your junior year, senior year of high school, and you can score high enough on the ACT to go to a four-year college, or you're not successful because you don't. And I just think that is, first of all, that is not good for students. That sets a lot of students up for failure. I don't think it meets kids where they're at. I don't think it respects the diversity of giftedness that we all have, just as people. We all have different sets of skills. So that's where my passion around not giving up on kids. And right this minute, we've got kids all across this county in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade who many of them are behind grade level. And instead of going, oh, crap, they're behind grade level. Let's be realistic about the fact that this town is full of thriving people. Well, some of my cousins are in this category. Like half my cousins went to Sequoia Vocational. Almost half of my first cousins. And many of them made great careers for themselves, not because they were great standout students, because they're hard work and they got a set of skills, and that's half the battle. And so I really want to see education customized where we don't have this one-size-fits-all model. And at Brainerd right now, you can't really go kind of a career training route, or certainly not a traditional vocational route, even if you want to. For example, there is not a dual enrollment path. And by dual enrollment, I mean dual enrollment straight to the technical college. You can dual enroll in a few programs at Chattanooga State, but the technical college out there, it's free. It's a one-year certification, 94% job placement rate. Several of our high schools have a dual enrollment path. Brainerd doesn't even have one. I think that's crazy, especially if you understand the legacy of education in the city of Chattanooga. We can talk about that more.
So why doesn't Brainerd have that collaboration?
I'm blown away. I don't know. Now, there is a little bit of collaboration with Chattanooga State. There is understaffing, from what I understand, talking to Principal Sorrells, there's understaffing in, for example, there's this great cosmetology facility at Brainerd. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
It's pretty awesome.
But they don't even have enough teachers to teach the classes. So that seems like something that ought to be addressed ASAP. Because I just think the measurement here ought not be numbers and even I think one of the real flaws of public education
should be we see discrepancy. Let's get some dollars to these schools.
Yeah, where dollars are the problem. I mean, I think in some cases this pathway doesn't exist, right? It shouldn't be dollars that prohibit a kid from going a dual enrollment route to the technical college. The technical college is there. It's got capacity. Actually, after COVID, it's got a little more capacity than it does a couple years ago. That's just a failure of leadership, man. And the seminal failure of leadership, single most mind-blowing for a guy my your age, and I don't know how much you know about it, but the story of the closure of Kirkman High School is one of the great...
Shout out to all the Kirkman graduates who listen to the show. We appreciate y'all.
Is one of the great inequities in modern Chattanooga. And it shocks me how few people even know what happened, why it wasn't even... closing a building's one thing, but closing down a multi-generational education pathway is a shame. And the fact that back there in the early 90s, that the then city school system didn't have a clearer vision has served our city and county
community leaders and grassroots organizations have been speaking towards this issue for years.
Yeah.
County commission, school board, and felt like their voices haven't been heard. I can remember back when I was young, when Kirkman first shut down. Yeah. There was a cry out then to if not anything replace what it was. Yeah.
They moved the equipment to Howard, but within about a year they had shuttered the program at Howard because that's not the kind of high school Howard was. You just went to Howard for a different path, and what people don't realize, I don't think, even people who've been around here, I don't think people realize how profound Kirkman's role was in our community, culturally, and economically. It was a big school. Big school.
I think people do realize that.
Okay, maybe they do.
I think it was...
I've just raised a lot of eyebrows in educating people on the history of what happened. It's 1,200 kids. Of course, by the 80s, it was predominantly black school. Even in this late 70s. But I mean, in its heyday, it was this extremely diverse, very interesting. It was a city school, but you had to pay... I've got some Kirkman pamphlets. This is a core part of our campaign. I intend, if I get elected, I intend to rebuild Kirkman. We're going to bring Kirkman back, and I'm going to call it Kirkman because it ought to honor that legacy that never should have been ended in the first place, and it should honor all the tradespeople and business owners in this community who went there and kind of wondered what the hell happened. Why did it ever go away? And it went away in the name of development. I think it's a great lesson for our community to learn, C-Grimey, that development is great, but can come with consequences. I mean, that was a land grab by the city because we wanted to go build this tourist district. And what's funny is how many locals even hang out in the tourist district. I'm all for our tourist economy. And the truth is the tourist economy pumps money in here. It has net made Chattanooga a better place. But we just got to be more eyes wide open, especially when you invest public dollars. I mean, here's the irony. So in 91, you tear down Kirkman. You build hotels. I mean, it's a big site. It was 16 acres, the whole campus. So hotels are on part of it. The IMAX is on part of it. And then by 97, 98, opening in 2000, they built the baseball stadium up on Hawk Hill, which is where the football field was. That's where Kirkman played football. So that's where the lookouts end up. So now, 20 years later, just 20 years later, we're talking about tearing that stadium down. And we're not going to have a stadium there. We're not going to have a high school there. And we're talking about spending taxpayer dollars on another stadium. And I'm not saying that absolutely, unequivocally, never should we build a stadium. But I'm just saying, man, are we going to be tearing it down 20 years from now? And I just think, as a rule of thumb, let's invest in people, let's invest in schools, let's invest in things that are going to be here 100 years from now, and be real careful, in the name of economic development or pacifying this investor or this rich person who wants a free ride on the government dollar. Like, let's be real careful because you've got a story down here from the riverfront of a disaster.
So, with that being said, how do you feel about the privatization of schools? Sort of the land grab that we have seen from the results of charter schools. Yeah. What do you feel about charter schools and privatization of public schools in a way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, charters are all across the country like a mixed bag. I mean, you'll see communities that have been served tremendously well by charters. I mean, the story of Miami, Florida is pretty extraordinary. You grow up in Miami, Florida, almost anywhere, poor neighborhood, white neighborhood, Latino neighborhood, black neighborhood, you got tons of options about where you go to school. That's pretty cool. Texas is similar to that. Here, you got good charters and bad charters. It's not, and here's just not just in this county, but in the state of Tennessee, you got good charters, bad charters. My hunch, pretty strongly, is that Ted Alling's model at Chattanooga Prep, when they send their first cohort off to college, is going to be a bang-up success. How scalable is that model? I don't know. I mean, he and Kelly sunk millions of dollars into the school. They couldn't have. That model wouldn't have worked had you not had the allocation per student is just not significant enough for them to have ever secured facilities and run the curriculum they wanted to run. So I'm not adversarial toward charters. I've always been skeptical. It's not a decision that's made at the county level anyway. I'm skeptical of vouchers. I mean, you talk about privatization. I mean, I don't know that I'd describe charters as privatization. I mean, they still are
vouchers to go to private schools.
Yeah, that to me is not workable. I mean, it's been struck down in this state in courts. I mean, I think the idea behind it's great, but what I don't understand there, the part that's not made sense to me is, for example, I think the proposal that was on the table at one time a few years ago was to provide like $8,000 for a student. Well, if CCS costs 16 or Macaulay costs 30, what good does 8 do you? If you're a single mom, you got 2 kids, and so if the concept there is that you're going to give a student money to go to private school, to me the concept only makes sense if you're literally giving them all the money they need to go to the private school. What I'm a bigger supporter of is customization within a public school system. See, I think it's a shame, and it's an avoidable shame when a child gets stuck in a school, or parents, because really it's parents through a certain age who are stuck, because they're the ones making the decision. You don't really maybe by high school you get to make a decision about where you go to school, but usually we've got a parent or a grandparent who's making a decision for us about where we're going to school. And the fact that you'd be stuck in a failing school simply because of where you live is pitiful and avoidable. But I think the way you avoid it is by diversifying the options that students have. Like this STEM school we run at Amnicola is not a magnet. It's a lottery based, but it's open access. So it's geographically diverse lottery. Any kid with any educational background has as good a chance of going there. That's an elite high school. You can go from that high school to Harvard. Why do we not have more STEM schools? It works. It's a Hamilton County public school. I think we ought to. So that's more my vision, is not the privatization of public education, but the customization of public education so that students from a variety of different backgrounds with a variety of different gift sets are uplifted and sent off onto a trajectory that'll serve them well. I just think it's profound if you focus public education. It used to be focused this way. I mean, it was the story of Kirkman on providing a young person at 18 years old on graduation day with a set of skills. It doesn't mean if you get a set of skills as a welder, it doesn't mean you have to be a welder your whole life. You can go to college. That's the other thing a lot of people don't realize about Kirkman, because it's known as a vocational school. It was Kirkman Technical Vocational School.
A lot of those people went to college.
A ton of them did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the community feel like it was an attack on Kirkman because it was a school that was minority.
Yeah. I think it may have been. Listen, I don't think that's wrong. The truth is, as I understand it, the black community stood up. The white community did not, and went away. And who did it harm more? I mean, just based on the student ratio in the 80s and early 90s, it harmed the black community more. I think at times, man, and this is a controversial opinion, but I think at times, since we merged the school system, because of the power dynamics of county government, the city of Chattanooga, the city gets a lot of attention. I'm not saying the city doesn't get attention, but I'm saying in terms of specific to our needs and challenges in a public school system, I think the city schools, the cities that rest in the schools that rest in the city of Chattanooga, may have actually gotten kind of redhead stepchild treatment because the power dynamics of county government have favored the more Republican areas. And the city's not Republican, right? County government's partisan. And I think that's wrong on a number of levels. One, you cannot deny, whether you live in Harrison or Soddy Daisy or Ottawa, you cannot deny that the city of Chattanooga is the economic engine of this entire region. Not just the county, but the whole region. And then I have a different philosophy than I think some people do. And that is, I don't measure Chattanooga. I don't measure the quality of this community by how it serves me. I measure the quality of our community by how it serves people who don't have near as much as I do. Like, that's what matters. And I think, frankly, that's not the easy path in partisan politics. The easy path is, I'm just going to kind of take care of my people. I'm going to get through a primary. I'm going to worry about this side of town that can kind of keep me in office. But I don't even get that. Like, that's not what motivates me in life, right? I mean, like, every last white kid who grows up in a decent school with decent parents in this town is just fine. Just fine. So I don't need, they don't need much from a county mayor. Little black kid stuck in a bad school without a clear path forward. Little Latino girl, no representation by at least, ethnically, no representation in county government. Like, they need a voice. They need a clear path. They need to be represented.
I agree. With that, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to finish up our conversation with County Mayor candidate Mr. Weston Wamp. Chill. Hip Hop for Humanity Child presents the People's Podcast, hosted by C-Grimey. In-depth interviews with top-tier guests from the worlds of business, politics, entertainment, sports, tech, and so much more. Asking the real questions to get the real answers. The People's Podcast, hosted by C-Grimey. Check it out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you're searching for podcasts. We there. That's the People's Podcast, hosted by C-Grimey. Brought to you by Hip Hop for Humanity Child. We're back. Clout Trap, the #1 hip-hop showcase in Chattanooga, is back. Thursday, April 28th, 8 p.m. at Wonderlinger Brewing Company, 1208 King Street. Calling all rappers, singers, poets, anybody who's got the skills on the stage and wants to rip it. DM C-Grimey, C-Grimey 423 on IG to sign up. The winner of Clout Trap will receive cash prizes, free studio time, and a slot in the finale show in September, where the winner of that Clout Trap will be a headliner for a mainstream artist this hip-hop week in October. Don't sleep on this opportunity, the best networking event for hip-hop artists in the region, plus opportunities to win cash and dope paid shows. Clout Trap, April 28th, 8 p.m. at Wonderlinger Brewing Company. Tap in. And we are back, the People's Podcast with your guy C-Grimey, and I am here with County Mayor candidate Mr. Weston Wamp. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier how you felt poverty, crime, a lot of different issues are interwoven with education, poor education, lack of education. Crime is always a big topic to candidates who are in mayor, commission. What is your stance on crime, Hamilton County, the Silverdale, Hamilton County jail facility? What's your stance on crime in Hamilton County?
Well, the county mayor, unlike the city mayor, doesn't have a direct role in law enforcement. Now, there's a lot of grifting, even in the race I'm running in. I mean, my two opponents will go running around, and they'll even kind of use sort of fear tactics about crime, and like Sabrina has talked about there being gang violence in the county, and that's just not actually statistically true. There's very, very little evidence that there are, kind of gang crimes. It's just there are databases that debunk that claim. And the reason I say that the county mayor doesn't have a direct role is because you've got an elected head of law enforcement in county government, the sheriff. And even that sheriff doesn't have primary jurisdiction in the city of Chattanooga, where a lot of our challenges are in violent crime. Now, you got crime everywhere. It's different though. And I mean, honestly, maybe the silent epidemic, if it hadn't hit your family in this county, and it's probably more of a county. And when I say county as opposed to city, kind of unincorporated portions of the county, is overdoses, man. I mean, if we didn't have Narcan saving people's lives, we just have people falling out all the time. We do have people falling out, but then fortunately, first responders are bringing them back. This is crazy, man. I mean, you talk about like a thief of hope and futures. The way it's just a sad sort of underbelly of our community, and our community is no different than others. But I think it's tragic. I mean, I met last week with a mom who, under a really awful set of circumstances, lost her daughter to an OD. So I think the role for a county mayor to productively talk about crime is to talk about offering hope through a solid public education, because that's where the county mayor actually has leverage and has influence. Get what I'm saying? I mean, even the sheriff himself, which is the county elected head, doesn't have a whole ton of oversight into the communities where you've got your most significant violent crime challenges, because it's just not where jurisdiction is, right? And that's where the city mayor, I often said during the city mayor's race, I thought those candidates ought to have been talking about crime more, and just kind of some of the kind of stark realities in some of our neighborhoods. It's just, sometimes I think white people feel very uncomfortable on these subjects, honestly. Just haven't talked to Tim and Kim about it a lot, and I feel that way sometimes. But in the county, I just think it's different. I think the role of county government in an era where you've merged two big school systems is to focus on, how can the public school system can't be mom and dad. It can't make up for everything in your life that's tough or that's gone wrong till the day you showed up. But I do think it can give you kind of a hope and a path to a future. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about it not just being a college prep path. I mean, we basically treat K-12 education as college prep. And so for kids who aren't on a college trajectory, it sucks. It's a bad experience. It becomes a humiliating experience. We talked about Brainerd High School earlier. I mean, Principal Sorrells will tell you one of her challenges is, you come through COVID, everybody's got worker shortages. You make $15 an hour at Taco Bell. She's got a lot of students going, why would I come back to school?
Exactly. So a lot of crime is linked to poverty. Trying to make it on low wages is tough.
Yeah. Low wages, though, are a result of a failing public school system. Like, if you go, and I think we need to broaden the conversation about when I talk about vocational education, that's not even a term that's really in vogue anymore. You're supposed to say career and technical, and I don't care about the buzzwords. I'm talking about preparing people to be productive citizens and live good lives and be able to take care of their people. So I think vocational used to have this connotation like we're talking about carpenters and welders and plumbers only. But even Kirkman was way broader than that. Way broader. Like you had automotive paths and you had kind of early computer paths. And I've started a program at Chattanooga State that's going to connect into a high school that gets young people started on a logistics career trajectory. Like the highest growth companies in Chattanooga are big brokerages, the logistics brokerages. They don't care if you have a 4-year degree. It's just not a prerequisite to go be a broker at all. And so why would we? And they've got shortages. The biggest brokerages here, like Steam Logistics, they're growing elsewhere. Like they're starting offices in other towns because they can't hire enough capable people here. So we just ought to, refocus public education on getting people ready for work. This is America, so the door's never closed on going a higher ed route. But I think this is the stigma that we've gotten badly wrong, and it is, if we push kids towards a vocational route, that stunts their potential. I call BS on that. Come on, that is not how life works. In fact, the most realistic way, and this is what college guidance counselors or guidance counselors in general tend to get wrong, the most realistic path to small business ownership and wealth, I'm talking about a good job, I'm talking about being rich. Mm-hmm. The most realistic path is having a set of skills. If you're a good auto body repair person right now, on automotive road you make $100,000. Maybe just as importantly, you got a set of skills so that if you want to go in year 5, start your own auto body shop, you can do that. It's hard to start a company if you don't have a set of skills.
And I think school counselors, college counselors, they don't take an introspective look at what are kids really into, where do they really want to go, what would be more advantageous to keep their focus in school, as well as what logically can take them to a financially stable level where they need to be at.
Yeah. You get what I'm saying, though? Does that sound like an answer, not a non-answer about crime? I just think,
It sounds like a non-answer. It sounds like a...
Well, but in county government, county government doesn't do law enforcement the way city government does. And so you're just not really being honest with people to act like you can impact directly law enforcement issues in the city of Chattanooga where a lot of crime is.
So what would be a way that the county can directly collaborate with the sheriff department so the community doesn't feel like the sheriff department is just being run vigilante, like its own entity with no checks and balances? Because a lot of times the community feels like, well, if there's not some type of oversight within the county, a community oversight, the sheriff's office can do whatever the hell they want to do.
That's right. Yeah, they've got that reputation, however deserved or not. That's a kind of a reality. I think the county mayor ought to exert the appropriate leverage over the sheriff's office, just like it can over the public school system, or over the roads department, or over the health department. And I talk, and I don't know. You should invite Austin Garrett on. Have you invited Austin Garrett on?
Yeah, I'm trying to reach out to him. Austin Garrett, man, his people. Get with me. I love it. I love it when people bring that up, because some people be ducking and some people just haven't got the message.
I was gonna say that's sort of one of the reasons I came over here. You and I don't really know each other. We know of each other, but we ought to know each other.
Yeah.
And so I am obviously. I think this is obvious. I'm pretty darn different than anybody who's ever served in one of the big county jobs. I'm not an old fogey. I'm not. I don't talk. I don't act the same way. I do NAACP forums. I'm willing to come show up here
Tell
I'll talk to anybody.
Tell sister do the NAACP forms.
Well, that's a misunderstanding though. Because Cody Cody's an open book, man. I don't need to speak for her, but that was a legitimate scheduling conflict. Like I didn't have scheduling conflicts, so I did it. But
what about the soundbite?
In all seriousness,
what about the soundbite about the scheduling conflict?
What do you mean?
So the scheduling conflict is one thing, but then there was a statement from the event of the conflict where what was said was insinuated as like I don't mess with the NAACP because of their stance with police, and I think
well, I mean, but I think if you see that she gave the media her communication with NAACP leaders, it was very respectful, and she made very clear that she intends to participate in the next forum. I mean, she's going to win, and she's going to be in the general election with Brooks.
He called it.
Oh yeah,
called it early.
Well, I mean, corrupt politicians have a really, really bad. They got bad prospects. That's always been the case. Incumbents have enormous advantages in both parties until they prove to have violated the public trust. And no matter what you think about Neil Pinkston, he violated the public trust, and that's how voters feel about him. So my only point is I assume the NAACP will come back around and do a forum with Cody and Brooks, and she'll do it. I mean,
shout out Miss Wamp. She'll be on the show.
Well, in her perspective, man, I mean, she very similarly. I'm not a lawyer. I don't get that world, but she comes at this thing. Yes, I haven't been a prosecutor, but also haven't been a public defender. And, I mean, you guys probably have pretty insightful conversations. She knows her stuff. I don't argue with her anymore.
Well, my main reason, not my main reason, but one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about crime. One of our first interactions on social media was there was a post that was shared about crime and an incident that was reported that turned out to be false. And so there was some back and forth banner. I don't know if that was your media team running the page or
I don't have a team that runs it.
Okay, so everything you.
Yeah.
So I felt like you didn't do your due diligence to look into the situation because the situation sounded a little funny from the get-go. You know what I'm speaking of?
No, I know what you're talking about. Listen,
here's the Dozer post.
Yeah, here's the deal.
And just for background for the listeners who don't know, there's a guy who got inebriated.
I don't know that it's worth
Got
re-prosecuting.
beat up in the Buffalo Wild Wings.
He didn't tell the truth, all right?
And then lied and said that some black boys beat him up and kidnapped him.
I'm not going to defend him. He did get beat up. That part actually CPD and others in City Hall confirmed, but that he was probably asking to get his ass kicked.
He started it.
Yeah. So the deal there is, here's the twist that may surprise you, is I did do my due diligence in this sense. I friggin' cross-examined that guy. He's a really good liar. And unfortunately, and I did not know this about him, because I don't know him, we're not friends, but he is a very disturbed person. And has a whole lot of personal issues that I found out about after I had spoken out. And I do have... I mean, I did this on the radio. I've done it on social media. I still am pained to some extent by the fact that these 3 kids were shot in the West Village. Kind of a couple days go by and we just forget about it. Pained by the women on the West Side. I feel like the community's sort of forgotten about the horror of that night. I think about the beautiful Brainerd High grad who was shot and killed outside of Southside Social. It felt like within about 10 days that just was gone. If that had been a white girl from Signal Mountain, it would not have gone away.
Oh, well, trust me, the community never forgets. We feel like I say we because I've worked so closely with so many different corners of this county, and I feel like we all family. But
anyway,
we've worked and we scream for the same help and collaboration and feel like voices go unheard.
Yeah.
So we never forget.
Yeah.
We don't. We're trying to be proactive so the next one doesn't happen.
Yeah. No, I know. Well, and I'm not saying that y'all didn't forget. I'm not talking about the black community. I'm talking about this city. I'm blown away at how few of my peers, friends, social groups don't even know when some of these incidents happen, and I feel like that's just a disconnect in our community. Yeah, and on the other deal, I mean, listen, we all have good days and bad days. That was not one of my better days, and I try. Some people who just kind of want to, kind of give me never-ending hell about it. But I'm a little different than some people in the political realm. I'll usually admit, I don't always like to, but I'll usually admit when I'm wrong. And on that deal, I was just wrong. Learned a couple tough lessons,
Housing is a big issue. Homelessness is a big issue.
Yeah.
We've seen a bill that's getting pushed through, I think even passed, SB 1610, kind of criminalizing sleeping on public property, fines, and jail time. Housing and homelessness for Hamilton County. How do we support our citizens?
It's primarily going to be a city issue. It's going to be one that the city and the county probably can tag team and ought to. I think it's probably one of the defining issues of the Kelly administration. I think Burke kind of claimed victory a couple times. I mean, you remember the claim that there wasn't a homeless veteran in Chattanooga?
Yeah.
I think he probably claimed early victory there. Affordable housing is interesting. This one is one that has been the legacy there. You're going back to Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise and Bob Corker being our city mayor with kind of a vision for affordable housing. That has been the domain of the city. I think it's increasingly going to become equally the domain of county government because there's so little land to develop in the city. You just can't hardly build anything. And so affordable housing is going to have to be in the county. And it is, you see that, and that's where the residential boom areas in the county are in unincorporated parts of the county. And you've seen Coppinger. I mean, Coppinger's not an ideologue. He's been he's met at the water's edge. He and I don't know if that was Kelly or if that was the end of the Burke administration. It was the very beginning of Kelly. They teamed up on a pilot for some affordable housing, give some tax incentives, and I think that's a very appropriate role for county government. What you got though is you got in parts of the county people who are going to oppose density at every opportunity. And density is what allows for people to live in an affordable way, right? Because there's just so much land, and so you're gonna have to in parts of the county where it's where it fits. You're gonna have to allow for a reasonable amount of density so that people can afford a place, man. Because interest rates back close to 5% on a mortgage, and everything's skyrocketed during COVID. There's no cheat code, to like having a big. I mean, even $1 million homes in this town now that have no yard. So the way the world is going residential, a lot of people our age, man, my yard's bigger than I want it to be. I mean, in all seriousness, Shelby and I, we've talked about we don't value the same things that our parents' generation valued. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people in our parents' generation are going, oh my God, you can't allow for any more density. Now the point that they make that is a real one is you got to allow for infrastructure planning, or else you can't. One of my biggest sensitivities because I envision a real disaster is when we start talking about density. Because a lot of the new density is outside the city. And outside the city, if you're not in another municipality, you're relying on volunteer fire service. People don't realize this, but the majority of this county, from square mileage standpoint, is serviced by volunteer fire departments. And you better be real careful building houses 6 feet apart.
Whew. Yeah.
When they're you and I, you live in the city, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you and I pay taxes so that if our house catches on fire, the Chattanooga Fire Department is going to come in a hurry, and you're going to have full-time paid people helping us put our house, put the fire out. That is not how it works in the rest of the county. You rely on neighbors, volunteers to do it all, and so you got it. Like all the funding has to be, I think, has to be appropriate in order to allow for the growth, and we've not done that stuff, man. For a couple decades, this county's not planned long term.
What's your thoughts on the school board becoming partisan?
I don't know that I've really been asked this question, and I haven't thought about it a whole lot. I think double-edged sword. I think my first instinct was to say that I didn't like it. But at the same time, I mean, almost everything in this country for 200 years is forged out of the two-party system. So it's not like it's a foreign concept to us. This idea that we're going to come to we ought to, it's a design of our form of government that we can come to some compromise through two competing parties. There may be more transparency in it, in that people have to kind of assign themselves to one party or the other. The curiosity to me is, what do guys like Marco Perez do? Is he an independent? Because I think he may be an independent, So do you have, is there a path for, because I don't think schools, I don't think most of the decisions in education ought to be partisan. I don't see that vision. And because of that, I don't sense also, like my friends who serve on the school, Tiffany Robbins is a close friend of mine, Joe Smith's a close friend of mine, Tucker McClendon's a close friend of mine. These guys are not ideologues, you know what I'm saying? And gals in Tiffany's case. They're centrists. They're people they're called to the cause because of students and parents. So will more of them run as independents? And we forget that you can run as an independent in parts of this country. You can win as an independent. I think there are some county commission districts or school board districts here in this county where you could win as an independent. So it'll work out. If it were up to me, I would have held off, if for no other reason than to have debated the question longer. It felt to me like we raised the question, and all of a sudden, before we could even really kind of debate the pros and cons of it, it was decided.
Why should the people vote for Weston?
Because I'm an agent of change. I'm not a status quo guy. I listen to everybody, try to admit when I'm wrong, care deeply about public education. If you care about public education, you may not agree with me on every front, but you got to respect that this is my passion. This is what I really care about. This is what's driven me to do it. It's not true of the other candidates. I'm not saying they don't care about public schools. I mean, you have to be a bad person to not care about public schools. But they don't have a vision and a passion that's burning that won't. If I lose, passion doesn't go away. I still will go to work as a member of the Board of Regents, trying to find opportunities for kids in this community to get themselves trained up with a set of skills that'll serve them well their whole life. And I think that's the consistency of our campaign, is that almost everything that we've been talking about that's a part of our platform are issues that you would have seen me take an interest in my whole life. They're not like, I'm running for office, so these are my platform issues. No, I care about vocational education because I serve on the Board of Regents, and I'm passionate about technical schools, and I grew up in a family of tradespeople, and I've always been a little bit of a contrarian on education. So if you want a county mayor who'll go to work on day one, serving every community with a specific heart and belief that our neighbors who are being left behind are the ones who need the most attention, that's me. And that's not a typical partisan political message, because a lot of times you run in a county that's trends Republican, you'll go, I'm going to run in the Republican areas and keep those people happy. My message to them often has been, we don't go as our best, wealthiest, most successful citizens go. As a community, we go as the least of these go. And to me, that's a pretty obvious vision for public service, but it's often, in this day and age of everything being divisive, we miss that.
Tell people how they can find you.
Just Weston Wamp, wherever, WESTON. There's not much competition for that. You know what I'm saying?
Cheer. Yeah, I think you're the first Weston
I
have met.
That's right.
This is your guy, C-Grimey, and this is the People's Podcast. Thank y'all so much for listening. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so you get a notification every time we drop a new episode. Thank you for all our sponsors, and thank you for everybody who's been donating, man. Check out the Patreon. Email us, the peoplespodcast@gmail.com. Appreciate all the fan letters and all the love we've been getting. Hit us up on Instagram, Hip Hop for Humanity. Child, man, thank you so much to the label for distributing and always having our back, man. We love you so much. The People's Podcast. Peace. Stay diligent, stay vigilant, stay dangerous. Power to the people.